Hey, Pastor Tommy here, and I'm back after about a 3-week vacation. Had a pretty significant surgery I'll tell you about toward the end of this update. And as I sit here, we're still dealing and grappling with the coronavirus and the implications of the coronavirus. And so today what I want to do is I want to share something with you that's been on my heart. Actually, it's been on my heart for a long time before the coronavirus. But the coronavirus, COVID, actually gives us an opportunity to talk about it because it's related. And so what is the issue? Well, let me first talk about the virus for a minute. When we think about the coronavirus, it's been 6 months now since, at least in Washington, things got shut down. What's confusing about COVID or the coronavirus? So for example, whether or not masks are effective. To me, that's confusing. According to the CDC, they might not be effective. According to my governor, absolutely they're effective. You know, and you've heard me, I've done an update that we need to obey the governing authorities. But nonetheless, it's confusing whether or not that's really a big deal. Why are some states opening and some states not opening, right? That's confusing to me, and it causes some kind of like angst, and you wonder like, okay, what's going on? What makes us any different than South Dakota? And I'm sure there's reasons. I'm just saying these are things that go through my head. The other thing that's confusing is why the coronavirus apparently isn't communicable in the context of thousands of people protesting or rioting, but it is communicable in the context of people socially distanced in church. Just confusing to me, not making a political statement. What's not confusing about the coronavirus? Well, what's not confusing about the coronavirus is that it's actually deadly, right? It's clearly, it's deadly to some people. And primarily it's deadly to people who have chronic conditions like diabetes or heart disease or some kind of lung disease. And even we talk about the elderly, right? It's sort of, if you're in your 90s, that's sort of a chronic condition, right? We only live, to be 80, 90, 100 years old at very best. And so chronic conditions are what are really the problem with coronavirus. And I posted an interview probably a couple months ago of a doctor being interviewed. He's a specialist in the coronavirus. He's treated patients with coronavirus. And he bottom lined the coronavirus like this. He basically said all that the coronavirus does is it takes that which is chronic and makes it acute. In other words, if you are struggling with some kind of disease that's uncontrolled and it might kill you in 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, what coronavirus does is it just accelerates that so that you might actually die in 5, 10, or 15, or 20 days. So what coronavirus does is it accelerates the chronic, and it makes the chronic acute. And another thing that isn't confusing is what's at the root of most chronic illnesses in the United States. And in fact, what's at the root of most chronic illnesses in the world. Do you know what that is? It's obesity. Yeah, obesity. Man, when you start looking at the statistics of obesity, it's sort of mind-blowing. So what is obesity, right? You define it as 30 points or higher of your body mass index. I would encourage you, everything I say today, maybe take notes and just Google it. How do you figure out your body mass index, right? If you're 30 or over, you're considered obese. Now, if you're real muscular or something, that sort of skews it, but nonetheless, you sort of know. 42% of Americans over 20 are obese. 70% of Americans, that's actually a little bit more than 70%, are overweight. And being obese and being overweight are tied to almost every chronic illness, right? Diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, Alzheimer's, cancer. 40% of cancers are directly tied to obesity. And so almost as a pastoral issue, how can we not talk about obesity, right? How can we not talk about being overweight, right? Typically, we tend to talk about that when we do, every pastor, maybe in the course of his lifetime, does a series on the 7 deadly sins, and gluttony comes up, and we say, well, gluttony is a problem. Gluttony is a problem. It really isn't the issue here. The issue here is the fact that basically people with dangerous chronic conditions that are a direct result of our diet, and we can control it. And on top of that, it isn't necessarily the result of gluttony. It could be something else. And that's what I sort of wanted to talk to you about today. Just another statistic that's interesting just in the world. According to the World Health Organization, when I was growing up, we saw pictures on television all the time of sort of starving children in the third world and what have you. And now we've gotten to a point in the world where more people die of being overweight than dying of being underweight. In other words, about 1.2 billion people of the year die in the world, or million people die just from being obese. And so obesity is clearly a problem. How do we deal with it? So one of the things Judy and I have done for years is we've sort of kept track of sort of dietary trends and things like that. And since I'm not a medical doctor, I don't want to come on and give you medical advice, and people started coming at me and saying, oh, you don't know this and that. I'm not going to do that. But what I do want to tell you about are two books that Judy and I read over vacation that I think are pretty significant and pretty important. Two guys I've actually followed on YouTube for a while. So these books I'm going to give you, I'd encourage you again to write them down, read them yourself. You will thank me for it after. So the first book is this. It's entitled Why We Get Sick, and then the subtitle is The Hidden Epidemic at the Root of Most Chronic Disease and How to Fight It by Benjamin Bikman. That's B-I-K-M-A-N. So again, Why We Get Sick, The Hidden Epidemic at the Root of Most Chronic Disease and How to Fight It by Benjamin Bikman. Bikman is a professor at BYU. He's not a medical doctor, but he's a medical researcher. He's a PhD. And his book, in some ways, this is, if you like nerd out on studies and things, his book is full of them. So it's all the sort of the latest studies about obesity, and primarily his whole point in his book is that the biggest problem that all of us have is insulin resistance. That our body pumps out insulin, and if you pump out too much insulin, your cells become resistant to it. The problem is that insulin makes things grow. So for example, if your body's pumping insulin like crazy to try and get into your cells to work, but you've also got cancer present, the cancer is like, oh, thanks, all this insulin, and the cancer just explodes, right? Because the rest of our cells are insulin resistant. That's just one example. The other book that's really important, and this guy, I'd encourage you can look him up on YouTube, is Jason Fung, and his book is entitled The Obesity Code, Unlocking the Secrets of Weight Loss. Now, I wish this book had a different title because it sounds sort of trendy and it sounds like the latest weight loss book. It's actually a scientific treatment of insulin resistance, and the last few chapters are about fasting. Jason Fung is a nephrologist. In other words, he's a kidney doctor who runs a clinic that treats people by fasting. And one of the things he has said, I've heard him say over and over again, is he's like, the reason that we don't hear more about fasting is there's no money in it, right? There's a lot more money in trying to find a pill to heal your obesity than to tell you to stop eating. He's going to tell you to stop eating. Spoiler alert. Let me give you takeaways from these two books. Number one, the primary cause of our chronic illnesses, everything from Alzheimer's to diabetes to heart disease, is insulin resistance. What causes insulin resistance is too much insulin. Surprise. What causes too much insulin is our diet, right? Our diet in the United States is terrible. And before you feel bad, it might not be your fault. At least not all of your fault. Second, the common wisdom for losing weight doesn't work long term. For example, move more, eat less. Remember Michelle Obama came out during her time in presidency, and I think in good faith wanted to fight obesity and push the agenda of move more, eat less. And those things aren't bad in and of themselves. They just don't help long term, apparently, with weight loss and insulin resistance. So while it's not bad advice, it's not necessarily good advice. Third, the issue, according to these researchers, is not how much we eat, but what we eat and when we eat. In other words, there's in some sense you can eat whatever you want as long as you're eating the right thing, but also when we eat. In other words, we need actually breaks from eating so our body can actually process food, so our body can deal with the insulin, so we can actually sort of let the insulin dissipate, and that basically is going to come down to like fasting for some amount of time. One of the things Fung says, Fung's book is actually pretty funny, but one of the things he says over and over and over again is stop eating snacks. You just don't need snacks, period. Now that's hard for me. I like snacks. I like chips. I love chips. I like Cheetos. Now I love Cheetos. All that kind of stuff I love. Fung would say, stop it. So last thing, if I had to summarize this, both books with one piece of advice, it'd be this: stop eating so much sugar. Just stop. Actually, I don't want to say just stop because that makes it sound easy. It's not easy to stop eating sugar. But at the end of the day, sugar and refined foods are at the heart of the fact that our insulin is constantly elevated, and our constantly elevated insulin is what causes us to gain weight. You have to read these books. Why do I say it's not so easy? It's just this. So many of you know, I'll close with this, that I recently had a pretty significant surgical procedure. For my whole adult life, I have had reflux in my esophagus. I mean, bad reflux. And it got to a point where medicine wasn't working anymore. And it took me like almost a year of talking to my doctor, and then talking to a gastrointestinal guy, and then talking to surgeon, until finally I just had a surgery, a laparoscopic fundoplication, which is basically they go in through 5 different spots in your belly, and miraculously they cut your stomach open and tie it around the bottom part of your esophagus and basically make it tight again. And so that was a week ago, and for the first time in my adult life, I have absolutely no reflux. It feels miraculous. Now, imagine my surprise when I was in the hospital. The procedure is done, and they bring me my first liquid meal. That's all I could have. I was on clear liquid diet or liquid diet, and they put everything on the tray in front of me. And I picked up one of the packed things that they gave me. Now, let's call this product Unsure. So I picked this up, and just by habit, I read the ingredients. And so the ingredients on this is exactly what they gave me. Ingredients: number 1, water. Number 2, corn maltodextrin, which is basically sugar. And then second, sugar, and whey protein isolate. So in other words, the primary ingredients in this health drink are sugar. In fact, I did the math, it's 82% sugar in this. And so they did this miraculous surgery, I felt, and then they gave me poison after, at least according to Doctors Bickman and Fung. And so I didn't drink it. In fact, if I didn't drink or eat the things that had sugar while I was in the hospital, I wouldn't have had anything, but I had to pick and choose. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you all of this because obesity in the church and obesity in the United States is a tremendous problem. If we're going to be a blessing to the world and a blessing to our neighbors, we need to first sort of start in-house. And are we taking care of our own house? So if you are a Christian, if you're a church member, are you actually leading the example for those outside by watching what you eat? By trying to move some? Not that that's going to heal everything, but it will make things better. And in the future, if for future updates, I plan to, don't hold me to this, I'll do the best I can. I actually am thinking about trying to get some interviews done with some nutritionists and some doctors that can actually help us and be a blessing, not only to us, but to those around us. Because we don't want to just survive coronavirus and hope it doesn't hit us because we wore masks. What if we were all healthy and didn't have to worry about it in the first place? Think about that. I look forward to talking to you more about this issue in the future. Coming up this weekend, I am excited because we are talking about maybe the most controversial passage in the whole Bible. That is Genesis chapter 22 and the sacrifice of Isaac. I am glad to be back, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Have a great weekend.